Welcome to the Michigan Football Junkies podcast. I'm Jeremy Miller, and this is Ohio State week. This is the week that we've been waiting for all year long. Now, few people are a little worried. Blake Corum went out in Saturday's game, and then there's a little bit of misinformation going around. So there was a tweet went around by a reporter saying he's on Blake Corum. Ryan Hayes said he's a great player, but everybody else is going to have to step up with him out. Everybody started freaking out. Oh no, Ryan Hayes is even saying he's out. That's not what was said. The full quote from about when Ryan Hayes was asked, "Hey, about his confidence in the offense if I had to play without Blake Corum." His response, "We planned on this. He's a great player, but I think everybody else is going to have to step up with him out, and I think we're up to that challenge." It was all about if Blake was out, if they were without Blake. So it's not as bad as everybody thinks. Blake had no structural damage. Several people saw him after the game walking, no limp. He was out the very next day without a brace, without a limp. Now he could have had something very small, just for like compression or something like that underneath his pants, but I didn't see anything there that suggested it was a bigger brace to keep his knee in place or anything else of that nature. He was walking around without a limp. I think he's going to be fine, especially because Blake said himself, "I'll be fine. I'll be playing." So people need to stop freaking out. But I got Alex Gleitman, formerly from 247, from 11 Warriors. I mean, he's been around. He's been a main Buckeye guy for a long time. Next up, we have Alex Gleitman from the BuckeyeHuddle.com. Welcome on there, Alex.
Hey, Jeremy, appreciate you having me. Excited. The game week is here, and it's it's going to be a classic, I think. So very excited to talk with you about the upcoming matchup this Saturday.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really exciting considering this is the second one of our lifetime that we've had two undefeated going into the game, and the last one was an unbelievable game. I wish it would have went the other way, but hey, this upcoming week, I know a lot of people are checking the weather. And right now, last I looked, about an hour ago, it's saying 60% chance of rain, but about 53 degrees. I think the weather, that can really affect this game, don't you think?
I looked at AccuWeather, which I think is a little bit more accurate than Apple Weather, and things can change 8 million times between now and Saturday. It does say rain. I think they have it at 59% chance of rain, about 49 degrees, maybe raining for about an hour and a half, about 9/10 of an inch. Not a ton of rain. I think people saw what happened to Ohio State in the Northwestern game, and they automatically assumed Ohio State can't play if it's bad weather. Well, that weather was 50-mile-per-hour, 55-mile-per-hour wind gusts. I don't necessarily think weather impacts Ohio unless it's going to be 55-mile-per-hour wind gusts, which it seems like maybe 12 to 15-mile-per-hour winds. I just don't. I think yes, weather could have an impact on the game. I'm not saying it couldn't, and I think it does favor Michigan, to be honest, because they are a ground and pound team, whereas Ohio State relies a little bit on their athletes making plays with the ball in their hand and through the air. But I just think that it's a little bit of a misconception. If you're able to throw the ball, like the wind has more of an effect on throwing the ball than the rain does, I guess is where I'm getting at. And it doesn't seem like it's going to be freezing temperatures. It doesn't seem like it's going to be crazy winds like we saw in Northwestern. So I think that's a little bit, I'm sorry, being a little long-winded here, but no pun intended. But I think that it's a little bit being overblown by both fan bases. Ohio State fans panicking a little bit, and Michigan fans probably getting a little overzealous with overconfident with what the weather forecast says right now.
Yeah, because if it's light rain,
Right.
I think that's not really going to have a big
Correct.
effect. I think it's still going to have somewhat of an effect on the passing game, but in that case, does it have more of a negative effect against Michigan because we haven't been able to pass the ball real well?
That's a good point too. No doubt.
So there's
Yeah.
'cause, when you really look at Michigan and Ohio State, they're almost like two UFC fighters. Ohio State wants to go for the knockout. They're Conor McGregor. They're that knockout artist. Michigan is Hoist Gracie. They want to get you down and just grind you into submission. So that's why I was thinking, depending on how the rain hits, that could affect the game. Because if it's a light rain, it's not going to affect Ohio State as much as a lot of Michigan fans are thinking. And I appreciate you bringing that up. Well, we also have something else in the line besides the game. We have two Heisman candidates. I think Corum's really on the outside. He has to have a phenomenal game, like a 200 plus yard game, in order to get into the actual discussion of can he win it. He's clearly going to go to New York, but he's on the outside looking in. I think right now it's between Stroud and Caleb Williams.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, the outcome of this game is definitely going to I think determine the Heisman Trophy winner, because I think if Ohio State wins and Stroud plays, I can't really see a scenario where Ohio State wins and like CJ Stroud was not great and throwing picks and things like that.
I
It would have
agree.
to be a really funky game. So if Ohio State wins, you have to assume CJ Stroud played pretty well. I think that will, and we shouldn't assume, but if it's Iowa or Purdue, I think either Ohio State or Michigan will win pretty handily in the Big Ten championship. Um, I, I think CJ Stroud's winning the Heisman Trophy if Ohio State wins this game on Saturday. If Michigan wins the game on Saturday, I still think, even if he has a Hassan Haskins type of performance, I think it's still going to be tough for Blake Corum to win the Heisman Trophy. But I think it would probably solidify his invite to New York if that's not already done, depending on if they're bringing 3 or 5 people this year or whatever. But Caleb Williams, yeah, is after a great game against UCLA. I think he had over 500 total yards of offense. They got a game against a ranked Notre Dame team this week. They would then have the Pac-12 championship. So he's got a great chance to overcome Stroud and win the Heisman Trophy if USC can win out. But I still think that's dependent on Ohio State probably losing this week. With Stroud probably not having a great game if that's the case, and B, losing the opportunity to have that 13th game in the Big Ten championship ahead of the Heisman voting.
Yeah, because Caleb's got more rushing yards, more overall touchdowns, but I don't know. I think it's between Stroud and Williams this year. I think
Totally.
I mean Corum. I don't see a scenario that he can win it with, because he has almost no receiving work this year, which is actually a real surprise to me. But let's get on to the game. As far as injuries are concerned, because that's a big thing this year, which in previous years I don't think we've had as many players up in the air as far as on the injury front. With Ohio State, Henderson's been kind of dinged up most of the year, like off and on. How is Mayan Williams?
It's interesting. Ohio State has had a lot of injuries this year. It's really been an unusual year for them in that regard. They had their cornerback. They never had all 4 of their top cornerbacks healthy until I think last week. It seems like Williams and Henderson trade off, missing a week every single week. They've rarely been healthy together since the beginning of the year. Mayan definitely suffered a knee injury in the middle of the season. He then suffered a hand injury getting caught up in the first down chains. And then he suffered what I think looks like a sprained ankle 2 weeks ago, rather. And Henderson, as you said, has been dealing with a lingering foot injury for a bit now. So, obviously those two, Jackson Smith-Njigba's basically been out the whole year, and I don't expect him to play this week. I think Henderson goes this week. I think Henderson probably sits this week. Williams goes this week. I wouldn't be shocked to see both technically active, if you will, even though I know that's not a thing in college football. But Ohio State does put out a report for game time decisions and people who are going to be out. I wouldn't be shocked if neither player is on that list, but I just because of the magnitude of this game, I think both might just suck it up and play. But I think Williams is definitely going to be more healthy than Henderson might be right now for this game. I think like dating back to last year, and this has been my knock on Travion Henderson. I mean, when he's in the open field, or when he has like a hole there, like he's pretty like unstoppable. But
Hmm.
he doesn't have great vision, and when you run sometimes the zone scheme and the stretch play, and you need guys with like Blake, not just like tooting Blake Corum's horn, but like the ability to cut it back through the lanes and the cutback lanes. He just like doesn't have that vision. And you saw last week, I know he was hobbled, but you saw when they made the move to Dallin Hayden last week, just how much more effective the run game was. And I don't think it was totally because Travion Henderson was hobbled. I think Dallin Hayden just has much better job of getting upfield quickly, seeing the hole. Henderson bounces everything. He dances a little too much in the backfield. It's just something he's going to have to really work on over the next year if he wants to make that jump his junior season to be able to go to the NFL next year. But I think you've seen the offense be more effective with Mayan Williams and Dallin Hayden in because they get north-south, or I should just say they get north much quicker. They hit the hole much harder. And Henderson has a lot of plays where it's like -2 yards, -3 yards. He'll then have a 67-yard run, but Hayden, like even his bad runs were going for like a +2 yards. So I think the best move for Ohio State, and call this a hot take, I guess, if you will. I mean, if Williams is healthy enough to play, he's got to start, but I think Dallin Hayden needs a significant amount of run. And if all three players were healthy, I would play Dallin Hayden ahead of Travion Henderson right now.
Yeah, I mean, the stats even show it. I mean, even yards after contact, Mayan Williams is double what Henderson is. Now, let me ask you, Ohio State, it seems like they're predominantly zone blocking this year. Did they do more gap blocking last year?
No, I mean they had different O-line coach. Ohio State actually like is pretty variable in the run game.
Hmm.
They run zone, they run some power, they run a little bit of counter, duo. So like they're pretty, I'm not the biggest X's and O's guys, but they are varied in the run game. They do run a lot of zone, and they love stretch. And Henderson should be good at that given his skill set, but he lacks the vision. You got to be able to, again, if it's not there on the outside, you got to be able to find those cutback lanes, and he's just not great at doing that. So I think that they've done a little bit of better job of being less predictable in their run game scheming the last few weeks. But from an execution standpoint, really, Mayan Williams and Dallin Hayden have been much better when they're in there versus Travion Henderson.
Okay. Well, over to the offensive line, because I think this game, whoever controls that line of scrimmage, they have the upper hand in the game. Your guys' offensive line, Ohio State's offensive line has definitely looked better this year, but I also don't know how good the pass rushers have been against Ohio State. And it's nothing against Ohio State. I just feel the Big Ten is really down this year. We don't have any big sack artists in the whole conference. There's no Chase Young, there's no Aiden Hutchinson.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably going to be a battle of defensive coordinators. I mean, yeah, there's no Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo. I know Michigan's going to want to put pressure on CJ Stroud and, make him beat them like that. And they're going to have to find ways to dial up different pressures and different blitzers from all over the field to make that happen, I think. Ohio State, I would say, is probably in a, I don't want to say better position to get pressure with just their front four, but like I think Zach Harrison and JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are probably better defensive end pass rushers than anyone Michigan has, but they haven't always been, as you said, it's not Chase Young, it's not Joey Bosa, it's not Nick Bosa back there. So they're human. They've made some really, really big plays, especially in the back half of the year, all three of them really. But I mean, Jim Knowles, the new defensive coordinator, has brought in a new scheme, a new attitude to this defense, and how he schemes this game up, and how Michigan schemes the game up, I think is it's really gonna. I think more than anything, the defensive coordinators are really gonna play a key factor in this one. So it'll be exciting. I mean, Ohio State O-line, as you said, has been good, but again, put them under pressure. Let's see what happens, right? So,
Yeah,
and vice versa.
yeah, because I'm really curious as far as like DeJuan Jones and Paris Johnson. Obviously, they played really well, but they're both enormous. How well can they play, as far as going, with some of these players going speed to power or just trying to beat them off the edge. We don't really have that guy to just beat somebody around the edge with speed. Morris is, I mean, he's enormous too. He's 6'6", 295. I mean, what edge rusher is that big typically? It's not, standing up at least. You don't really see a guys that big standing
No.
up. They typically have their hand in the dirt. He just tends to work better standing up. The one spot that it seems like has given Ohio State the most trouble has been Matthew Jones at right guard. He seems to be the one that has had the weakest out of the five, and he still played fairly well. And I'm just curious, Mozzie Smith, Mason Graham, is there going to be a mismatch there, or is he going to step up and maybe keep them at bay? How do you think that matchup might go?
Yeah, well, look, I've been in any limited breakdown I've been doing so far. I've definitely been saying that the guards for Ohio State and Matt Jones has been hobbled a little bit by a bad ankle. He actually got rolled up on in Maryland and was seen in. I mean, this is precautionary. Always they do this stuff like crutches and a walking boot after. I know he's very questionable for this game, so it may not even be Matt Jones. It may be Enoch Vamahi or Josh Fryer. Both have done great jobs when they've had to come in this year. But yeah, I mean, look, that's definitely a position. I think Donovan Jackson has had, he's a sophomore. He's really good. He's former 5-star recruit, but I think he's had his moments too. His baptisms by fire. So Luke Whippler, the center, has been pretty good, but I think, going after the interior of the Ohio State line is probably the better move. Paris Johnson and DeJuan Jones, Pro Football Focus had a stat today that was the two of them have faced a combined 630 pass block snaps and have allowed 0 sacks. So I think that just shows you how great they've been this year, especially in pass protection. So I think Michigan, you're going to see a lot of pressures on the inside and trying to exploit that part of the Ohio State offensive line, just as you suggested, Jeremy.
Your tackles seem to match up really well with our edge rushers, because our edge rushers are more power than anything, and your tackles are enormous. Over to Stroud, he's been really good this year. It just seems like they need that third guy. If Jackson Smith and Jigba would have been healthy this year, I think CJ's numbers would be similar, if not better, than last year. But it seems like they've tried to play around with was it Johnson and Fleming as that third receiver. Are those the two main ones that are swapping in and out at that slot?
So right now with JSN hurt, it's Egbuka in the slot and Fleming and Marvin Harrison Jr. on the outside.
Oh, okay. I was thinking Fleming would man the slot more, but
now he's a big body. Julian's a big body, whereas Egbuka is a little bit more of that twitchy guy who could do a lot.
Egbuka seems tough too, though. He kind of reminds me of a more athletic Jason Avant.
We're going a little back there. Yeah, I mean he's a big kid. He's 6'1", 205, but he's fast. He's elusive. I mean, he could play outside or inside. Like if JSN was healthy, he'd be on the outside and JSN would be in the slot. So he's versatile. Maybe he's a little bit of a bigger Garrett Wilson from an Ohio State standpoint comparison. But yeah, I mean he's tough. He's taken some hits this year. He's come across the middle and taken some shots, but he holds on to the ball and he does a pretty good job. He returns punts for Ohio State. Sure, I mean Jason Avant had a good career. We'll take that, right?
But I think he's more athletic than Jason ever was.
Yes, I agree with that.
Now you also have Stover, which I think he's played fairly well, especially with only this is only his first year on offense, correct?
He's like switched back and forth between
Okay.
offense and defense. But yeah, I mean, like in the bowl game last year against Utah, he was playing linebacker. So yeah, it's really incredible. Like Ohio State has had a great run of tight ends make the NFL between like, the Jeff Hiremans, the Nick Vanetts, the Luke Farrells, the Jeremy Ruckerts, and all these guys were like pretty highly ranked. And then somehow Cade Stover, this guy who's like switched over sides of the ball, is having like one of the best years for an Ohio State tight end from a pass catching perspective that we've seen in quite some time. So we always joke about how those guys probably have to be like banging their heads against the wall, like just seeing Cade, like the way he's using this offense. But he's been really good. He's a good blocker. He's been really reliable in the pass game. He's been very clutch. So I won't be surprised to see him try to, exploit the middle of that Michigan defense a little bit in the passing game.
That seems to be the weakest part of our coverage. It seems like over the middle in those linebacker coverage areas, just in that about 15-yard range over the middle seems to be our wide open so many different times. I mean, Iowa, for God's sakes, lit us up over the middle with their tight ends. I also wonder how much is Stover's increased use due to Jackson Smith and Jigba being out as well.
I think it's a little bit. I think it's definitely a little bit there. And it's like that has been the argument for the tight ends in the past, right? It's like when you have Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jackson with the Jigba, like there's only one football that goes around every play, right? So
Yeah.
that used to be the argument there. So I think, there could be a little bit something to your point.
Yeah. And then you also have Marvin Harrison Jr., which I'm sorry, he is hands down the best receiver in the country. I have a feeling that Michigan's going to try and do something where they have Green on over top of him, just because he's a bigger corner than Turner is, and then maybe try and roll a safety over there. Problem is Ohio State has so many weapons. Stroud is great, and you don't want to open up big sections of the field by doubling one player specifically, but there isn't a cornerback in this country that can stay one-on-one with Marvin Harrison Jr. So it's kind of a pick your poison. That's just going to be a really interesting scenario as far as what Michigan does in coverage to try and slow Ohio State down.
I don't know. No, I think the answer is, I think, stopping the run, making Ohio State have to throw the ball. Like, they're going to have to throw the ball, and then being able to put pressure, get pressure, whether it's just rushing for or bringing pressure, getting pressure on CJ Stroud, forcing him to get the ball out quicker than he wants to. And, I think that the formula that's been successful, teams have been doubling Marvin Harrison Jr. They've been bracketing Emeka Egbuka, and they basically have been leaving Julian Fleming one-on-one. And saying we don't think he's anything special, when he has to go one-on-one. He's not a super deep threat. He's not, he's not getting crazy separation like some of the other guys maybe. I think Fleming, at 6'2", 210 pounds or whatever, he's like more of just like an X receiver that like he's had some dropsies a little bit, but normally, he's a guy you use that big body, you run a hitch, you run a little out, and more of a shorter route, like possession type guy. And I think teams are saying, like, with Jackson Smith and Jigba out, like, we'll take our chances letting him beat us versus Marvin Harrison Jr. or Julian Fleming when they've had success against the Ohio State passing game. So I think that's probably the formula. Can you execute that? I don't know. We'll find out on Saturday, but I mean, if I see that, I'm sure Michigan's defensive staff is looking pretty closely at that as well.
Fleming was still a 5-star number one wide receiver in the country when he came out in 2019 or 2020.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're all good players. I just think, the level that they've had with Olave, Wilson, JSN, some of the guys before, the Terry McLaurins, et cetera, of the world, it's a little bit of a drop off this year. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a freak. I think Egbuka's gonna be really, really good. I think he is good now. I think he's gonna be elite next year, but he's still on his way there. There's still some inconsistency sometimes. Fleming, I don't know if he's just a guy or if he's really anything that special. I think the jury's still out on that. So it's a great receiver room, but They've definitely the offense. I don't think it's as good as everyone thinks it is. I think it's a very, very good offense, one of the best in the country. But I think losing JSN, they've gone from like virtually unstoppable and elite to they're human. They're beatable.
Yeah.
Not that they weren't
Well,
beatable for Michigan last year, but I don't see Michigan. I think Ohio State at all costs is not going to let Michigan beat them the way they did last year. I'll tell you that.
Well, Stroud's numbers are down significantly from last year, and I think a lot of that is because they don't have that third guy. We've spent a good amount of time on the offense. Let's kick it over in the defense. You guys have JT, and I'm not even going to attempt to say his name because he seems to be getting better throughout the season. As he goes through the season, he seems to be getting free easier and easier, whether he just has really good hands to keep the offensive lineman off him and to just slip past him. He's not one of these guys that's just beating a guy around the corner like he's just ridiculously fast with great bend. He just seems to have much better hands, and he's got really good power, but even more so, he's smart because he keeps getting his hands up to deflect passes. He's got a couple interceptions. I mean, he's got several pass deflections, but I think he's also getting in some of these quarterbacks' head where they're not throwing those outs, those passes in the flat as much because he keeps getting his hands on them.
Yeah, I mean he's a big guy. I always thought he'd end up inside at 3 tech, but he's proven me wrong. He's really, really good on the outside. Former high school basketball player, so really great feet, really athletic. Very active with his hands, as you said, bats down a lot of balls, had a tremendous game against one of the best games I've ever seen. A few weeks back with the pick six and the interception, against Penn State. He's like the flip, like the light came on for him. It was very obvious this back half of the year after their bye week, the lights just come on for him. And he's been truly a dominant player. The only thing that slowed him down has been Larry Johnson using a heavy rotation on the defensive line, which has been very frustrating to fans in the sense that, maybe they're not putting their best players on the field all the time. And I understand giving guys a break, giving guys a breather. But in this game coming up, he's got to be on the field for a majority of those snaps because he's just been he looks like maybe he's like the next Bosa or Young for Ohio State.
Having that rotation could also be part of Jim Knowles' defense as well as Larry Johnson's choice. But, your defensive tackles, they have not produced like your two ends have. Now, how do you think, as far as with our guards and center, they played very well. They pull a lot of guards and tackles and tight ends, and you'll even get some wide receivers kicking through there. How do you think the middle of that defensive line is going to hold up against our offensive line?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, in Jim Knowles' system, Teron Vincent's position is really meant to like take on blockers. It's not meant to don't get me wrong. Obviously, you try to make plays and things like that, but was taking on blockers to free up the linebackers who are very active. So how successful he is could determine how successful Ohio State is. And then, Mike Hall's been dinged up. They've really been having him on a pitch count. When he is healthy, he's been one of the best interior players I've seen in quite some time. I don't know how healthy he is. I think that's a big question mark. So, that matchup's going to be key for, Ohio State. They don't need to get after the quarterback on the interior. That always helps, but they just need to play gap sound football, take up blockers, let the linebackers, run clean, and be able to keep their run fits and things like that. So, how well they do that on Saturday, I don't know, but that's going to be a very big key to success, obviously, in this one.
And I think in order for Michigan to have success on the ground or to have their best chance for success as far as on offense is to be able to get a man on Eichenberg in that second level. He has been a beast this year for Ohio State. I mean, he has shocked me as far as how well he's played. Our run game, I'm not real worried about. I'm worried about our pass game. And Eichenberg, Chambers, they both, I'm saying Eichenberg has played the pass fairly well, I think. I mean, he's one of the higher rated players according to PFF as far as in coverage on your team. I don't know how JJ is going to move the ball down the field against this defense if JT is in his face. I don't know how well Ohio State is going to be able to guard JJ if he gets outside the pocket and starts running. You know, as far as with running quarterbacks and the way this game is lining up, how well do you think Ohio State is going to be guarding the running quarterback?
You know, they've had, well, luckily they had a little practice this week with Talia Tagovailoa. They also had a little practice the week before when Indiana, I forget, I'm blanking on the kid's name. They brought in their backup quarterback pretty early, and he's a pure runner. He barely could throw the ball. So I think that's been really good for Ohio State. They haven't had to face too many running quarterbacks this year. You know, they've played pretty well against them. Jim Knowles schemed up pretty quick, you know, almost like linebacker spies and things like that. You know, it's going to be a big part of this game, right? It's what makes Michigan's run game so successful, the ability that JJ could pull the ball and run it on a read option, and you have to hesitate for that split second, right? So, you know, it's a very simple game to me. Can Ohio State stop the run and force McCarthy to beat them over the top? And if they do that, can McCarthy beat them over the top? If the answer to the first question is yes, and the answer to the second question is no, I think Ohio State's probably going to win pretty handily. On the flip side of the ball, you know, can Ohio State run the ball? They haven't had they've been inconsistent in that area. I think if they can, it's going to make moving the ball and through the pass game much easier. And if not, you know, is CJ sharp? Is he just picking them apart to kind of loosen that box up a little bit and make it easier on the run game? So, you know, you could talk about all these matchups, all these players, all these coaches, but like it's at the end of the day, it's just still a very simple game. And I know it's so cliche, but it all starts and ends at the line of scrimmage in this one, especially. So, you know, if the linebackers, to your point, can run free, they're not getting hands on them in that second level. I think they're obviously gonna have a plan to make sure McCarthy's not just running wild on them all day.
Alex, I think you summed it up perfectly because it's all dependent on, can Michigan put enough pressure on CJ to slow down that passing game, because that's about the only way I think you're really going to slow down that passing game is to put pressure on CJ Stroud, hit him, sack him a few times, because without the sacks last year and without the pressure they were getting, Michigan, as well as Michigan was running that ball, they still might not win that game without the pressure against CJ. That's going to be the main thing. Can Ohio State stop the run? Can Michigan slow down Ohio State's pass? And we're going to find out this Saturday. But before we go, where do you think? What's your prediction on this game?
I'm not ready to give it yet. BuckeyeHuddle.com on Friday. We'll have our stat predictions. That's when I need to dig in more. I need to do more research. Is Corum playing? Who's on Ohio State's play? Like right now, I'm leaning toward an Ohio State win in a really good game. But I can easily see Michigan winning too, and I just need to dig in more. So call me TBD.
Well, right now, from what I'm hearing, Edwards, Morris, Corum, they are all playing. I know Harbaugh's
I've actually
heard
opposite on Corum. I've heard if he goes, even he's having trouble cutting back and things like that. So if he goes, it's almost like actually Ohio State should almost hope he goes because he won't be 100%. I mean, not that it matters, but I've actually heard opposite, that Corum, it would almost be a little surprising if he doesn't go, but I do think Edwards is going to go. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting, right?
Alex, where can we find your work?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Alex Gleitman, AlexGleitman, or as I said, BuckeyeHuddle.com. We were up in Michigan today covering the Harbaugh press conferences. We'll have coverage both ways in the rivalry all week, so come check us out.
I appreciate it so much.
Thanks, Jeremy.
It's great to be a Michigan Wolverine. It's great.